Well, last week, we really what it was is before we could really get into the discussion of if anger is a sin, we had to look at three questions first. We had to look at what exactly is anger, why do we get angry, and what makes God angry. So we looked at, especially the first two, we kind of answered them at the same time. Anger is defined as a strong passion or emotion of displeasure and usually antagonism. And it's excited by a sense of injury or insult. Okay, that's the textbook definition of anger. And we saw that according to Gary Chapman, anger is really more of a cluster of emotions. There's the primary emotion, which is sparked by some sort of event that's involving insult or injury. And this primary emotion causes us to feel emotionally vulnerable or exposed. And so we resort to anger, which is a secondary emotion, so that we can cover up those feelings of vulnerability. So it's actually, when you think about it, when you really get into it, anger is a lot more complex than we think it is. You're feeling insulted, you're feeling embarrassed, and it makes you feel exposed. So the quick thing, and sometimes the easy thing, is to go to anger, to cover it up, to protect yourself. So it's one of the original defense mechanisms, anger. And so we answered those two questions right there. We know what it is and why we get angry. So now we have to look at, we know that God gets angry. Okay? 455 times in the Old Testament, the word anger is used. 82% of the time, it's referring to God's anger. So we know God gets angry. It's part of his nature to be angry. It's not an essential part, and I will always point that out. It's not an essential part of his nature. It stems from his essential nature of holiness and his love. Because of his holiness and his love, he knows what is best for his creation. And when we break away from that, when we commit acts of injustice and unrighteousness, God is justly angered. So, what makes God angry? What makes God angry? Injustice and unrighteousness. Sin and evil make God angry. And we learned this, we talked about Jonah and taking his message to Nineveh last week. And what we learned that is God will always punish unrepentant sin. He always has and he always will. But it is God's desire to forgive. Right. He doesn't want to punish. He is a good and just and loving Father. He doesn't want to punish, but he will. But it is his desire to give, to forgive, to forgive. So, we've answered those three questions. We know what those first... there we go. We know what those three questions, the answer to those three questions. So we've got two more questions today that we've got to look at. Is it a sin to be angry? And is there a purpose to anger? Okay? We know that we're going to get angry. Can it be used for good in some way? And I want to share with you a lot, if not most, of what I'm sharing last week and this week is from this book. It's by Gary Chapman. It's called Anger, Handling a Powerful Emotion in a Healthy Way. And I've read quite a few books and looked at, in studying for this and over the course of time, I've read quite a few books. This is the best one that I have read yet. In fact, several of the books that I looked at in preparing these sermons referenced Gary Chapman, referenced this book and another book that he does on anger. So this is a wonderful book if you get a chance. Because I am not an expert on handling anger properly. Like most of us, I'm an expert at getting angry. All of us know how to get angry really quick. But I'm not always the best at handling anger properly. So what we're going to talk about today comes almost directly from, or a lot of it comes directly from that book. So, is anger a sin? We're going to look at that. Is it a sin to be angry? So we have to remember that anger is a part of the nature of God. And I will always point that out. But it's not his essential part. He experiences anger. It's part of his holiness, part of his love. And his concern for justice and righteousness is what causes him to become angry. And then we look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It says, so God created God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. We are created in God's image.
Right.
So therefore, even in our fallen and imperfect state, we still hold the image of God in our spirit. We still have a great concern for justice and righteousness. We have a sense, because we are made in God's image, in what is fair and just and right. We have a sense of morality because of we are made in God's image. Okay, it comes from God. Now, like most things that we have, it can be twisted because of our fallen nature into inappropriate and selfish things. But we get our sense of morality from God, from our likeness to God. And anger is an emotion that arises whenever we encounter what we perceive, what we realize or think is wrong, unjust, or an injury. So, and Gary Chapman puts it this way, I love this. Anger is not evil. Anger is not sinful. Anger is not part of our fallen nature. Anger is not Satan at work in our lives. Quite the contrary. Anger is evidence that we are made in God's image. It demonstrates that we still have some concern for justice and righteousness in spite of our fallen state. So actually, our capacity for anger shows that we're not just animals. It shows our desire for rightness and justice and fairness. It's not evidence of our depravity. It's evidence of God's divinity in us. So you with me?
Yes.
Okay. Anger is not a sin. The emotion of anger is not a sin. So we know that. But the next question, did I put it up there? There we go. The next question. Is there a purpose for anger? Does anger have a purpose? Can anything good or constructive come from anger? Well, we can look again at Jonah. Okay? God sent Jonah to Nineveh with a message. Because their sin had become so pervasively, they had become so pervasively sinful and so destructive that they had become like a virus to humanity. And they weren't just affecting themselves in the city, they were affecting and infecting everything and everyone around us. Around them. So for the good of humanity, God could not allow that sin to continue. He could not let that virus continue to spread. So, in response to Nineveh's sin, God responded with a positive action. He sent Jonah there and he told them, okay, you guys are going to die in 40 days. I'm going to wipe you off the face of the earth in 40 days. You're going down. But you understand? Now, I understand that wiping a city off the face of the earth may not seem like a positive action to us. But because of God's love for them, He could not allow their sin to go unchecked. They had gotten to the point that they were so evil and they were infecting so many other things that God had to stop it. He had to punish it in some way. So the Ninevites responded to Jonah's message and they changed. They changed their ways. They humbled themselves. They repented. They spent 40 days fasting and praying and asking forgiveness. And God saw that the wrong had been righted. It stopped what they're doing. So His anger had served its purpose. He got angry with them. He was going to destroy them. And it served its purpose. It changed their ways. So when we look at our anger and the fact that we are made in God's image, our anger, we can see that our anger is designed to motivate us to take positive action when we encounter injustice. That's God's purpose for anger. It's designed to motivate us to take positive action when we encounter injustice. Now, Jesus showed us this. If you want to turn to Mark chapter 3, and also put your finger in 2 Kings chapter 5, because we're going to go there later. If we look at Mark chapter 3, we see that Jesus showed us how anger can motivate to positive action when he healed a man's hand on the Sabbath. We're going to look at chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Jesus went into the synagogue again and noticed a man with a deformed hand. Since it was the Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." Then he turned to his critics and asked, "Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath? Or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or to destroy it?" But they wouldn't answer him. He looked around at them angrily and was deeply saddened by their hard hearts. Then he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and it was restored. At once the Pharisees went away and met with the supporters of Herod, to plot how to kill Jesus. Jesus was angered by their legalism. They were so stuck on the law. Okay, and this wasn't the only time he got angry at legalism, but that's another sermon. He was angered because they thought that keeping the law was more important than ministering to human need. They thought that it was more important to keep the Sabbath than to help someone and heal one. Now, the reality of it is, with healing this man, the Sabbath was just an excuse. If he had healed them on a Tuesday, they'd have been upset about something and they would have taken it back to the Pharisees. But this was their excuse. And his anger moved Jesus to positive action. He, in order to show them what was more important, he healed the man's hand. Again, Chapman says his action was to heal the man in front of their faces, rejecting their evil thinking and graphically demonstrating in front of everyone that human ministry is more important than religious observances. And we've had more than one instance of that in our church. When there was the sulfur fire, and we had people staying down at the fire station to help hand out supplies and help people who had been repopulated instead of coming to church. Hey, that's a worthy reason to miss church. If you're helping people who need help, dang it, that's what you do. But both Jesus in his healing and God's forgiveness of Nineveh make it clear. God's response to anger is always to take loving action, to seek to stop the evil, and to redeem the evildoer. Now that's tough. That's a different way of looking at anger than I've ever seen before. The purpose of anger for God is to take loving action, to stop the evil, and to redeem the evildoer. So now we understand that anger isn't a sin, and that it's actually designed to motivate us to take that constructive action. We see injustice, or we have an injustice or insult done to us, it should move us to right the wrong and to bless the offender. So that's what it comes down to. Anger is not a sin, but just like everything else, our fallen nature causes the godly purpose of anger to become distorted. Rather than seeking the good of the person who's hurt us, we lash out. And we want to give it back to them as good as they gave it to us. So the actions, it's not anger that is sin, it is the actions that we take when we are angry. That's the sin. Hey, there's a great meme. I love this meme. If anyone ever asks you, what would Jesus do? Remind him that flipping over tables and chasing people with a whip is within the realm of possibilities. I think that's funny. But that's Jesus. Okay? That's Jesus doing that. You don't get to chase people around with a whip and say it's okay. Okay? But acting sinfully in our anger is a sin. Acting wrongly, lashing out, hurting the person who hurt you, taking revenge is wrong. It is sinful. And God does not want it. Okay? Acting sinfully in our anger, it damages the church, it damages families, it destroys families. It destroys marriages and relationships. And it can destroy the person who is angry. When we choose to allow ourselves to, and it is a choice, the actions we take, even when we are angry, are a choice. Yes. And when we choose that, when we choose to take those actions, we are choosing to sin. It may not feel like we have a choice because those feelings are so intense, but it is. It is a sin and it is a choice. Now, Chapman explains that there are basically two types of anger. He calls it definitive anger and distorted anger. Definitive anger versus distorted anger. Now, definitive anger is anger that is actually born of wrongdoing, okay? A righteous anger. Some sort of injustice or injury has been done to you. You've been treated unfairly. Your property may have been stolen. Someone maybe lied about your character. Those things happen. Or maybe something that has happened to someone you know and you love. Okay, that's an injustice that has been done to you or someone you love. Yeah, there's a reason to be angry. There's a reason to be upset about that. Even more so if you see injustice in the community or in the world. You see the exploitation and unjust treatment of the poor and the homeless. You see, especially if and I've seen it, and I know other people that have seen it too. The people who are mean to a homeless person that's sitting on the side of the road just because he's homeless. Just because they think that he's lower on the totem pole than they are. And that is sinful, and that is wrong. And yeah, it should make you angry. It should move you to try to take some sort of constructive action to stop it. And to teach the person something who is doing it. The tragedy and the abuse of human trafficking. And it should make us angry when we hear about it. It should motivate us to change it. It's a good thing. These things should and do make us angry. It's a righteous anger. It's born of our sense of justice and mercy. It's part of our likeness with God. When we see these injustices or have them done to us, it should make us angry, and it should spur us on to respond in a way that rights the wrong and at least tries to redeem and bless the offender. That's definitive anger, a just, righteous anger. Then there's distorted anger. Distorted anger is not valid anger. Okay. And I have to defer to Chapman on this because he puts it beautifully. It is triggered by a mere disappointment, an unfulfilled desire, a frustrated effort, a bad mood, or any number of other things that have nothing to do with any moral transgression. The situation has simply made life inconvenient for us, touched one of our emotional hotspots, or happened at a time when we are extremely tired or stressed. You see how the bar has been raised? Not just a little annoyance or an irritation is justifiably angry. Something genuinely done wrong to hurt you, that's a reason to be angry. Not these things. Now, the emotion of anger, of distorted anger, is no less intense. Okay? It simply does not come from genuine wrongdoing. Okay? Someone looks at you wrong. Someone looks at you in a way that you just didn't like. That's an idea, and it makes you angry. That's an example of distorted anger. You're in a hurry, and you're driving down the road, and someone pulls up in front of you and drives under the speed limit. Has that person done anything wrong? Hashem. No, he has not done anything wrong. He has annoyed you, and he has frustrated you, but he has not done anything wrong. Okay? Or, what's the other one? Oh yeah, someone takes too long in the checkout line. You're in a hurry, and someone not only has a mountain of stuff in front of you, but they whip out one of those checks for welfare, food stamps. And it takes forever and a day to figure that out. You know what? They're not doing anything wrong. They're buying food for their family. If I get pointed, you're being selfish for thinking that your time is more important than theirs. Think of it in that sense. Same thing with the driver. Yes, I understand. You feel strongly. And you're frustrated and embarrassed. I understand that. But just because you feel that way doesn't mean that the person actually did something wrong. Are we here? Are you hearing what I'm throwing out there? Yeah. Just because you're ticked off doesn't mean they did something wrong. That's right. And I would say, and I'm going to say this, because I experienced this going down to my family's house on Friday and coming back up. 99.9% of anything related to traffic on the road would fall into the category of distorted anger. If they have not crashed your vehicle by some wrongdoing, do you really have a reason to be angry? Even if this guy cuts you off and goes slow, then pulls over to the other lane, backs up, flips you off, and tells you that your mother was never married, and speeds up down the road. Okay. Now, is that really? Now, okay, you can say, especially when he yells stuff and he flips you off, that's insulting. Odds are you're never, ever going to see that guy again. And probably you can at least take from those actions that he is not a man worthy of worrying about what his opinion of your mother is. Okay? And you can let it go. You don't have to chase him down and beat him to death. Or anything else. Well, there's really never a reason for road rage. And that's something the church has to learn too. Okay, I'm done with that. I'm done with that soapbox about driving. But distorted anger could be looked at as a perceived insult or a perceived injury. Somebody looks at you wrong. Somebody makes an offhand comment. It's a perceived injury. It's a perceived insult. The kids today call it being butthurt. And I love that word. Because it sounds as silly as the situation merits. He's just butthurt. Because the feeling may be real, but the reason for it is not valid. Now, when we look at the book of 2 Kings chapter 5, we see a great example of distorted anger. That's the story of Naaman. Now, Naaman was a very rich and very important soldier from another country. And he was greatly respected by his superiors. Most likely, if he was the leader of many men, he was probably loved by his men. But Naaman had one problem. Okay? He had leprosy. He had leprosy. Now, the word that is translated, the Hebrew word translated leprosy, could actually refer to any number of infectious skin conditions. But bottom line is, he had a skin condition that was infectious. It may have threatened his life, but it made his life miserable. So he hears that a prophet in Israel named Elisha can heal him. So he packs up his men, and he gets a fancy chariot and all kinds of nice clothes and a bunch of bags of gold and silver, and he goes to see Elisha. And now Naaman drives up to Elisha's house. You got to remember, Elisha is a prophet of God. Odds are he was living very humbly in a very meager home. But Naaman drives up with his big entourage and his fancy clothes and his gold and silver and his fancy chariots, and he knocks on Elisha's door. And Elisha's servant answers the door. Naaman tells him who he is, how important he is, and what he wants. He wants a healing for this leprosy. The servant goes and tells Elisha. Elisha never even comes to the door. He tells his servant, and the servant tells Naaman, go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Just go wash in the Jordan 7 times. You'll be healed. Have a nice day. Closes the door. Naaman was furious. He's very insulted. He feels that he has not been treated with the respect that a man of his caliber and his ilk is due. So we read on the 2 Kings chapter 5, we start with verses 10 and 11. 11 and 12. But Naaman became angry and stalked away. I thought he would certainly come out to meet me, he said. I expected him to wave his hand over the leprosy and call on the name of the Lord his God and heal me. Aren't the rivers of Damascus, the Abana, the Parfar, better than any of the rivers of Israel? Why shouldn't I wash in them and be healed? So Naaman turned and went away in a rage. He was butthurt. As far as Naaman was concerned, Elisha had greatly insulted him. He didn't even come to the door and meet such an imposing and respected man as him. He was insulted. But in reality, what Elisha had actually done was give him a cure for the very cure that he was seeking. He gave him a cure. He said, go wash in the Jordan and you'll be healed. He gave him the cure. It just wasn't wrapped in the package of respect and reverence that Naaman thought it should be. He got what he wanted. He just didn't get it the way that he wanted it. So in fact, he was so angry that he was actually going to leave. He wasn't going to go wash in the Jordan River. He wasn't going to follow his instructions. He was going to leave uncured. His thoughts were so distorted that he could not see that he got the help that he wanted. His anger was not valid. Now, thankfully for Naaman, he had good people around him. We pick it up at verse 13. It says, but his officers tried to reason with him and said, Sir, if the prophet had told you to do something very difficult, wouldn't you have done it? So you should certainly obey him when he says simply go and wash and be cured. So Naaman went down to the Jordan River and dipped himself 7 times, as the man of God had instructed him. And his skin became as healthy as the skin of a young child, and he was healed. He was so wrapped up in his distorted perspective of anger that somebody actually had to talk him into doing what the prophet, taking the medicine and the cure that Elisha had given him. We have to remember, just because we feel angry, it doesn't mean we have actually been wronged. Naaman was not wronged. He was unjustly angry. So, now, again, in this book, Anger, Handling a Powerful Emotion in a Healthy Way, Chapman gives us 5 steps of how to control your anger. Now, I honestly say, if you have a chance to read this book, the book goes into much greater detail. It actually talks more about distorted anger, which can be a real problem for a lot of us. So, but these 5 steps are a great start. Honestly, they're a great start because it's at least you're starting to think about what you're doing. And a lot of us don't think about what we're doing when we're angry. So, 5 steps. First, step 1. Consciously acknowledge to yourself that you're angry. Okay? Say it out loud. Consciously say, I'm angry about this. What am I going to do? Consciously acknowledge your anger. Take a moment and admit it to yourself. Because a lot of people don't want to admit that they're angry. Okay? When you just take that instant and speak out loud, yeah, I'm angry, I'm upset about this, I'm ticked off, what should I do? Then what Chapman says is you've set the stage for applying reason to your anger. And I know anger and reason seem at the opposite ends of the spectrum, but when you apply reason to anger, it changes things. Now, the next step is possibly the hardest, but actually the most important. Restrain your immediate response. Stop. Okay, remember that the definition of anger involves displeasure and usually antagonism. Antagonism is hostility or open opposition. It means a reaction. It means a reaction to the offense. Don't react immediately. Stop what you're doing. Stop and think. Chapman says, refuse to take the action that you typically take when feeling angry. Waiting can help you avoid both saying and doing things you may or may not mean and later will regret. Stop. Restrain your immediate response when you're angry. And you don't have to tell me how hard that is. But you admit that you're angry, and that gives you just a millisecond to stop and stop yourself from immediately responding. Step 3, locate the focus of your anger. Think about it. What actually happened? Okay? What was the person that did this or said or whatever they did, was it actually wrong? Was this an actual offense, or did it just kind of hit you in the wrong way? Because if it's not an actual wrong, then it's not definitive anger. It's distorted anger. If it's distorted anger, then the decision is made, and you need to let it go. But if yes, and you've actually been wronged, you think about it. Is it serious? Is it a big thing? Or is it a minor thing? Because how serious the offense is affects how you respond to it. Is it a big thing? Is it somebody who just is kind of a social clod that doesn't realize what they're saying is hurtful? And you just gotta let it go? Or is it a serious, were they directing it at you and you're upset about it? And you have the right to be. But see, now that you've paused, you have a chance. You can go from reacting to responding. It's a huge difference between a reaction and a response. The onomatopoeia there is awesome. Reaction. You react. It's fast. It's hard. But you respond. You're giving. It's completely different. So you've had that. When you just take that second and admit that you're angry, and stop what you're doing, and truly ask yourself: is this a real offense? Just that. You've taken the reaction away, and you have the opportunity to respond. Step 4: analyze your options. Ask yourself: is this offense worthy of a response? If so, what would be a proportional response? What would be an appropriate action to take? Okay, remember, you're not trying to kill a mosquito with a sledgehammer. Okay? That's what happens when you react. That's what happens when you react. Chapman says, ask yourself, does the action I'm considering have any potential for dealing with the wrong and helping the relationship? And is it best for the person at whom I am angry? That's a big question. Is the action I'm thinking about taking best for the person that I'm angry with? The two most constructive options are either to confront the person in a helpful way or to consciously decide to overlook the matter or let it go. No, I'm not going to sing Frozen. Let it go. Finally, step 5, take constructive actions. If you decide to let it go, but you're still upset about it, you gotta pray about it. You gotta give the person and the offense and the anger over to God. If you gotta talk to somebody about it, talk to somebody briefly about it, just to kind of process it. But you've got to take it to God, and you've got to pray. And I say this again: give the person and the anger and the offense over to God. And this is also what you do if you realize that it's distorted anger and you don't really have a reason to be angry, but you're still angry. You give it to God. And you ask Him to take it away and take the frustration away. Now, if you decide to confront the person about it, do it gently. Do it with the same respect that you want to be treated with. No sledgehammer. You come to someone and you do it gently. And then you listen to what their response is. They may have a perfectly reasonable explanation for why they said it, or what they did, or whatever. They may have a perfectly understandable reason. And then it's all good. But if they admit it and they ask for forgiveness, give forgiveness without condition. Because that's what you would want. If you would wrong someone, you would want them to give you forgiveness without condition. And that's what God does. Forgiveness without condition. Now, these 5 steps, when we really, truly apply them to our lives, man, they can go a long way in handling anger in an appropriate and positive way. If you've been wronged or you've been hurt, they can help you. These steps can help you just take that step back so that you're responding rather than reacting. And if it's valid anger, you want to respond in a godly, loving way that builds up the body of Christ, that strengthens relationships, not tears them apart. But we have to look that not all anger is valid. There's that distorted anger. And that needs to be admitted and addressed and given to God. In conclusion, honestly, we can look at it. Anger is not a sin, but how we express it, when we just express it in a destructive manner, yeah, that's sin. Paul told the Ephesians, in your anger, do not sin. Okay, he's saying, you're going to get angry. Do not sin. I like the New Living Translation. It says, don't sin by letting anger control you. That puts it in a different light. We are to be controlled by the Spirit of God. He lives in us. He walks with us. He is to control us. When we give ourselves over to anger and allow anger to control us, then we're walking in sin. Badly handled anger can tear apart relationships. And when that happens, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Hey, when you blow off on somebody, it's not just to them. It's really more of a shotgun effect. Okay? Lots of people are hurt when one person loses their temper and goes off. Churches are torn apart. Families are torn apart. Marriages are torn apart. It's not just one thing, one person. It's a shotgun. I really hope if you want my notes on these 5 steps, let me know. I'd be happy to give them to you, or I might just go ahead and post them on my blog. I haven't posted on my blog in like 6 or 8 months, so it might be time. But I honestly hope that we can all take something from this. Anger is a powerful emotion. And we're gonna get angry. It's just a reality of how we handle it can make the difference between a church or a family being torn apart and a church or a family becoming stronger and closer and moving together. Because when it's handled properly, forgiveness comes in. And that's what bonds people together. The Holy Spirit works in such a powerful way. And the Holy Spirit will give us the strength if we rely on Him. We don't let anger control us. We let the Holy Spirit control us. Would you please stand?